Over the icy waters of the Arctic Circle, near the secluded fjord of Tromsø in northern Norway, 30 British Lancasters, piloted by Britain's finest airmen, dove into position on one of the most crucial missions of their careers. Their sights were set on the German battleship Tirpitz, a monolithic floating citadel and the Third Reich's crown jewel. Recognized as a maritime powerhouse throughout Europe, Hitler lauded it as the pride of the German Navy, while Winston Churchill ominously dubbed it the Beast. To Churchill, this behemoth was not just a ship, but a supreme threat to the heart of the Allies. The German menace was tasked with guarding the Baltic and preventing any supplies from reaching the Soviets, keeping the Allies fractured. Its continued existence compelled Churchill to risk his nation's most elite aviators in a bid to neutralize it, even as it hid in the waters of the Arctic Circle. Yet Tirpitz was not bound to be an easy target. After enduring over 30 large-scale Allied attacks, it was still alive, earning the title of an unsinkable battleship. However, on November 12, 1944, the moon's gleam on the Tromsø fjord was eclipsed by the British Lancaster bombers. The distant hum became a deafening roar for the Germans on board Tirpitz and along the coast, as they scrambled to their anti-aircraft batteries. As they manned their positions, the skies ignited in a tempest of flak and explosive fury. Amidst that maelstrom, the Tirpitz faced a force unlike anything it had seen before. The Lancaster's hulls were loaded with 12,000-pound earthquake bombs called Tall Boys, a new weapon with terrible power. If they couldn't sink the Tirpitz, nothing would. After Hitler claimed the reins of power in the early 1930s, he did more than merely advance Germany's rearmament. He pushed forward with his vision of restoring all military branches, not least the Navy, to their former glory. This dream materialized on April 1, 1939. With the gleaming battlecruiser Scharnhorst anchored in Jade Bay at Wilhelmshaven, the Führer proudly introduced Kriegsmarine Chief Erich Raeder to an assembly of top military officials. Amid the pompous ceremony, Hitler unveiled and oversaw the launching of the new crown of the German Navy, the battleship Tirpitz, sister to the mighty Bismarck, which had been launched just months before. With a slight size advantage over her older sister, Tirpitz instantly became the largest and most powerful battleship in all of Europe. Named in honor of Grand Admiral Alfred von Tirpitz, a stalwart of the Kaiser's Navy from 1898 to 1918, the ship was a nod to Germany's naval golden era. These colossal and groundbreaking Bismarck-class super battleships were a defiant move by Germany to assert its power against the navies of other European nations. Dreamed up by the Third Reich and built by a rejuvenated naval industry, these ships stood as Germany's counterpunch to the French Richelieu-class battleships of 1935. The French vessels, in turn, had risen as a response to the Italian Littorio-class vessels, designed to challenge the UK's naval dominance. Thus, the fierce naval race in Europe paved the way for a new kind of German super battleship, one that would become an unyielding pain in the neck for France and Britain. As Europe's fleets grew larger and incredibly more powerful, the prospect of a war more destructive and brutal than the Great War pushed the nations to attempt to halt the race by introducing the 1922 Washington Naval Treaty. This agreement sought to cap naval vessel tonnage. Though it initially forced Bismarck and Tirpitz to a 35,000-ton limit, the treaty's bounds proved pliable, often stretching to accommodate the interests of the major powers. A case in point, following Japan's 1937 treaty exit, the tonnage ceiling expanded to 45,000 tons, propelling nations, including Germany, to beef up their naval arsenals. But Hitler's plan to dominate the seas around Europe did not stop at building larger battleships. A new doctrine was needed. At the same 1939 gathering, he and Admiral Raeder unveiled Plan Z, a blueprint for a mighty Kriegsmarine consisting of 10 battleships, even more powerful than Bismarck and Tirpitz, 4 aircraft carriers, 15 pocket battleships, a staggering 250 U-boats, and a fleet of over 100 destroyers and cruisers. Though the construction of this force was estimated for 1948, its mere conceptualization thrilled the Führer, with the possibility of dethroning the Royal Navy once and for all. But Hitler's own power hunger came to undermine him. Instead of waiting for 1945 to launch his war in Europe, as he had promised Navy Chief Erich Raeder, he forced Britain and France into conflict by 1939. which would mean Germany would be hard-pressed to build the vast fleet that was promised by Plan Z, as most strategic resources were funneled towards the war effort. Yet, among its ranks, Bismarck and Tirpitz were still some of the most destructive vessels on Earth, and it was feared they would play a large part in the war that had just begun. Despite being only 2 ships, the mere mention of Tirpitz and Bismarck evoked images of unmatched power, with only a few British and French vessels hoping to outgun them. Their dominance could shift the Atlantic's balance of power, directly threatening Allied naval and merchant vessels. The Atlantic was Britain's lifeline, assuring the steady flow of troops, supplies and resources, particularly from the United States. If unleashed on the Atlantic, these 2 ships could single-handedly disrupt these vital shipping lanes, jeopardizing the entire war effort. Avoiding them would require massive rerouting and resource diversion. Beyond their material value, these battleships symbolized the pinnacle of German naval prowess and a constant reminder that Germany could oppose the Allies at sea. Leaving them operational would be a vast boost for Nazi Germany. However, targeting these massive warships sparked debate among the Allies. Some believed focusing so intensely on these vessels might siphon resources away from other urgent fronts. Others argued that the immediate threat came from merchant raiders and submarines disrupting shipping routes, not from battleships. Ultimately, the peril of allowing Tirpitz and Bismarck to roam freely was deemed too immense to ignore. Their destructive potential and symbolic importance galvanized the Allies to prioritize their destruction. Witnessing the German super battleships in action only intensified this resolve. Tirpitz's sister ship Bismarck had already demonstrated its destructive power by sinking Britain's flagship battlecruiser HMS Hood. This grim encounter underscored Tirpitz's potential threat if left unchecked in the Atlantic. After the HMS Hood tragedy, Bismarck became the prime target for the British fleet. Over several days, it faced relentless pursuit and a series of blistering engagements. As British forces checked Bismarck, its fate was sealed when aircraft from the carrier HMS Ark Royal launched torpedoes that jammed Bismarck's rudder, taking away its maneuverability. This allowed British warships, including the battleships HMS King George V and HMS Rodney, to close in. On May 27, 1941, after a fierce bombardment, Bismarck was scuttled by its crew to prevent capture and was sent to the deep. This marked a significant victory for the Allies, eliminating a major threat to their Atlantic naval operations. But her sister remained at large, and the Allies now knew what it could do. For Churchill, addressing Tirpitz was deeply personal. He was driven to sink Tirpitz as decisively as its sibling. In a testament to his obsession, the shortest memorandum from Winston Churchill during World War II read just 3 words. Quote, "Where is Tirpitz?" Directed at the First Sea Lord Sir Dudley Pound on December 14, 1942, this inquiry captured Churchill's constant preoccupation to send the formidable German battleship to the ocean floor. Churchill's concerns were not unfounded. Tirpitz was engineered to instill fear in its enemies. Even when empty, she tipped the scales at 42,900 tons, swelling to 52,600 tons when ready for battle. She was nearly as long as 3 soccer fields placed end-to-end, at 251 meters, with a beam that stretched wider than a 12-story building on its side. The ship was powered by a roaring 160 793 horsepower steam turbine, fueled by 12 superheated boilers. The thunderous sound would split the ocean apart as the battleship charged forward at 31 knots. It was a dreadful sight for any Allied vessel and a morale boost for Kriegsmarine sailors. But it was the guns that made her a threat to the Allies. 8 15-inch guns capable of hurling shells over 35 kilometers with ease. And these weren't randomly placed. They even had names. Anton and Bruno stood guard at the front, while Caesar and Dora held the rear. These cannons were protected by a shell of steel, some sections as thick as 360 millimeters. The guns were forged to deliver overwhelming destruction and take a great deal of punishment while continuing to fire. Her secondary armaments were equally impressive, with 5.9-inch guns and even more 4.1-inch ones guarding her flanks. If planes dared approach, she had a swarm of anti-aircraft guns, initially 28, but later bolstered to an intimidating 58 as it became clear the RAF would be throwing all its might against the battleship. If that wasn't enough, Tirpitz carried a deadly surprise, the Arado AR-196 seaplane. Swift hunters of the sky, these were her eyes and claws against lurking submarines. With her final modifications, she bore torpedo launchers, ready to deliver devastating underwater strikes. A thick belt of 320mm steel girded her against enemy shells, topped by 2 decks armored like fortress walls. She was at the top of the line regarding battleships, but she was not invulnerable, especially to organized, combined attacks, and that was just what the British had in mind. Tirpitz was hunted from the start. Before she could fully show her might, the British tried to sink her before she could finish her sea trials. With the loss of her sister ship Bismarck, Tirpitz was confined to the strategic waters of Norway, an anchored and ever-watchful floating fortress protected by the land and a dedicated crew of over 2,000. But the British had an ace up their sleeve, the decoded secrets of the Enigma machine. They knew her every move, and the Germans were unaware of this vulnerability. Thus, the British were ready when Tirpitz roared into action in early 1942. From her first combat mission, she would be pursued and hunted mercilessly. She was the greatest battleship, but also the most prominent target. Despite early efforts to sabotage her, the full weight of Allied efforts bore down on Tirpitz only after its menacing potential was plainly demonstrated. The event that triggered this was the catastrophe of July 2nd, 1942. Paint had not yet dried on Tirpitz when she lurked in northern Norway's waters alongside a German warship fleet, preparing to ambush Allied convoy PQ-17 en route to the USSR. Although Tirpitz didn't engage the convoy directly, its sheer presence was enough to cast a shadow of terror amid the Allied forces. When the Allies learned the fearsome battleship was in the area, Allied command ordered the convoy to scatter, inadvertently turning themselves into easy pickings. German air and naval units didn't miss this chance and annihilated 24 Allied ships. The sole idea of Tirpitz had thrown a wrench at the Allied operation. The carnage of convoy PQ-17 was a grim reminder of the urgency to neutralize Tirpitz. Previous aerial bombardments by the RAF had proved fruitless. It was clear that new tactics were needed. The Admiralty theorized that the key might lie in executing a covert, close-quarters assault against the anchored battleship. As such, Operation Title was born. This mission was audacious, to say the least. Using 2-man human torpedoes, known as chariots, the plan was to approach Tirpitz stealthily and attach explosives to its hull. On the night of October 31st, 1942, the hour had come. 6 commandos, the best of the best, geared up for what they knew might be a mission with a one-way ticket. Under the shroud of night, a submarine approached the Norwegian coastlines, slipping past German sentinels. The men and their chariots were deployed into the freezing waters, and they embarked on their journey toward Tirpitz, piercing complete darkness. However, the unpredictable North Sea had its own challenges to offer. The powerful undercurrents wrestled with the chariots, throwing them off course. 2 chariots were lost to the ocean's currents, forcing a retreat for their operators. The rest pressed on. But the sea was unrelenting. Battered by the currents and potentially compromised equipment, they found it impossible to fasten the explosives onto Tirpitz. As the first light of dawn pierced the horizon, the grim reality set in. The mission was a failure. Exhausted and disheartened, the remaining commandos abandoned their chariots and made the grueling swim back to the submarine. Despite their valiant efforts, Tirpitz sat untouched, its threat greater than ever. In the aftermath of Operation Title's unfortunate failure, British commando leadership remained steadfast in believing that a covert operation was the only way to bring down the colossal ship. They were convinced that the mission's collapse wasn't due to a flaw in the strategy, but somewhat uncontrollable external factors. September 1943 marked the onset of Operation Source, a renewed attempt to incapacitate Tirpitz via a commando operation. This time, British agents took to the seas with 6 X-class midget submarines, each loaded with explosive side cargoes designed to cripple the iconic battleship and other prominent German vessels in Norway. The challenge was monumental. The minuscule size of these submarines did little to lessen the dangers faced by their intrepid crews. From evading German anti-submarine defenses to navigating the treacherous Norwegian underwater topography, these men were in for a grueling ordeal. Of the original 6 commandos, only half reached their targets, yet it was X6 and X7 that would etch their names into history when the infiltrator successfully planted their explosives on the outer hull of Tirpitz. The subsequent explosion tore through the battleship's underbelly, ripping open fuel tanks, buckling bulkheads, and inducing flooding that saw thousands of tons of water rushing into the vessel. The aftermath was catastrophic. Generators were rendered useless, the turret, Dora, was knocked off its bearings, and the ship's reconnaissance float planes lay in ruins. The operation had been a massive success. The German super battleship had been crippled but not destroyed. Nevertheless, the extensive damage meant that Tirpitz would be out of the war for several months at least. But there was a heavy toll to be paid. X5's fate remains shrouded in mystery. X6, after executing its part of the mission, was forced to emerge, resulting in its crew's capture. The same was the case for X7. The good news was Tirpitz's aura of invincibility had been shattered, setting the stage for even more daring and explosive operations to take out of the face of the Earth. In April 1944, as they evaluated their previous failed efforts to sink Tirpitz, the Allies decisively pivoted their tactics with Operation Tungsten. Attacking from below, the waves had not worked. Now they would strike from the sky. From the decks of fleet carriers, waves of aircraft unleashed havoc on Tirpitz, stationed in the biting cold of Kafjord, Norway. The raid was chaotic and intense, but not decisive. The onslaught left the vessel marred and wounded, its superstructure showing clear evidence of the brutal assault. Yet, Tirpitz refused to be defeated. The months that followed saw the Allies persist with an unwavering determination. Operation Mascot was swiftly followed by the relentless hammer blows of the Goodwood operations. The directive was unambiguous: render Tirpitz powerless. If it cannot be destroyed, keep it cornered and useless to the Germans. But German forces were not about to let their symbol of naval dominance be destroyed. Using deceiving smokescreens, ceaseless anti-aircraft fire barrages, and the Norwegian water's natural treacherousness created a fortress around the battleship that was not easy to breach. The Germans matched the Allies' aggression pound for pound at every turn. The RAF tried time after time, but they landed dozens of devastating hits every single time, but struggled to land the killing blow. Their ordnance appeared to lack the raw power to breach the naval Titan's defenses. September brought a powerful new weapon to the Allies that could just be the final nail in Tirpitz's coffin. Operation Paravane would use the Tallboy bomb, Barnes-Wallace's terrifying masterpiece. This monstrous 1,200-pound device was more than just an explosive. It was designed for deep penetration to bore into the very heart of its targets. Termed an earthquake bomb, its capabilities were unmatched. It was engineered to dive deep, shattering robust defenses and armored decks of warships like Tirpitz. The resulting explosion and shockwave, even without a direct hit, could inflict catastrophic structural damage. On September 15th, in a daring raid from Yagodnik, Russia, 23 Lancasters armed with Tallboys stormed the Norwegian skies. Despite facing daunting defenses and brutal weather, one bomb achieved its deadly purpose. It drilled through Tirpitz, detonated beneath, and unleashed a hellish maelstrom from within. The aftermath was utter chaos. As her crew fought to keep her afloat, the massive battleship was severely damaged, with its speed and maneuverability hampered. Desperate and coordinated German efforts to save the ship unfurled. It would take them almost a month of on-site repairs to allow the enormous vessel to move south to Tromsø for more in-depth repairs. The beast was crushed and agonizing, but it wasn't dead yet. Despite the failures, the Allies now had one thing clear: it would be an air attack that would sink Tirpitz. The prowess of the Tallboy bombs was evident. Given favorable weather, they had the sheer power to shred the German capital ship into oblivion. Nestled deep within Tromsø Fjord's protective embrace, the Germans hoped they could keep the warship far away from RAF surveillance, enough time to bring her back to her former glory. But the Allies, equipped with the decrypted Enigma code, tracked the battleship's every move. Now, armed with motive, means and knowledge, the end game for Tirpitz was set in motion. Operation Catechism was launched on November 12, 1944. 30 Lancasters under the leadership of Wing Commanders J.B. Willey and L.A. Williams tore through the skies from Scotland. Maneuvering with precision, they avoided radar detection until the beast they hunted came into sight. Then, in a rapid, heart-stopping plunge, the bombers swooped, catching the Germans off guard. Frantic Kriegsmarine sailors scrambled to request air support from Bardufoss's Luftwaffe base. But luck wasn't on their side. There were no responses from the Luftwaffe, and no German pilots would fly that day. She could be wounded and weakened, but Tirpitz wasn't going down without a fight. Its anti-aircraft cannons roared, supported by land-based artillery, trying to swat the Lancasters from the sky. Flak illuminated the horizon, a deadly dance, as the raid hit its climax. At 9:35 a.m., Tirpitz turned its 15-inch guns on the Lancasters in a desperate move. The ship's artillery managed to scatter the assault, albeit briefly, but the relentless barrage continued, and then the moment of reckoning. 32 Lancasters from the elite number 9 and 617 squadrons unleashed a tempest of 29 tallboys. Amidst the firestorm, 2 bombs found their mark, and another fell dangerously close. The waters churned violently, and the deafening detonations split the air. Bombs rained around the pride of the Kriegsmarine. Many embedded themselves in the seabed, obliterating chunks of the sandbank that acted as Tirpitz's protective cradle against capsizing. One of the tall boys slammed through the deck between turrets Anton and Bruno but didn't detonate. Another hit amidships, carving out a gaping wound between the aircraft catapult and the funnel. The belt armor adjacent to the impact was obliterated. Some reports describe a third bomb grazing the port side of turret Caesar. Tirpitz was being torn apart, but it continued to fight back her attackers, then turned white in a searing flash. A thick column of smoke rose over 100 meters over the ship. The ship's magazines had detonated. The once unsinkable ship was broken, and left without power, she finally stopped fighting. A mere 10 minutes post-explosion, Tirpitz leaned grotesquely at 60 degrees. It was time. Men started pouring out, attempting to flee the wounded giant, as it succumbed to the waters. The scene was brutal. Around 100 sailors swimming for the shore were caught in the fiery blast of one of Tirpitz's turrets. From the original crew of 1,200 souls, only 82 survived the sinking ship, thanks to a last-minute rescue unit that hacked through the hull, yanking them from a watery grave. In the aftermath, fingers pointed directly at the Luftwaffe. Their abysmal defense of Tirpitz sparked rage. Major Heinrich Oehler of the 3rd Jagdgeschwader 5 became the scapegoat, standing accused of neglecting the Kriegsmarine's pleas for air support. His trial in Oslo was marked by chilling whispers of execution. Nevertheless, he was slapped with a 3-year sentence, and a mere month saw him free, albeit demoted and thrust into a Me-262 squadron back in Germany. Later probes would highlight a tragic lapse in communication between the Kriegsmarine and Luftwaffe, sealing Tirpitz's fate that day. The skeletal remains of Tirpitz prevailed in the spot for years after the war, until German-Norwegian recovery efforts rescued most of the remains from 1948 to 1957. The legacy of the battleship Tirpitz offers a profound exploration into the intricacies of psychological warfare and strategic significance during World War II. To the Germans, Tirpitz stood as an emblem of unmatched naval prowess, a floating citadel that imperiled the Allies' maritime supremacy. While, in hindsight, the ship engaged in limited direct combat, its looming presence in Norwegian waters compelled the British to reallocate vast resources, including ships, aircraft and manpower, solely to keep it in check. This fleet-in-being strategy underscored how, even without active engagement, Tirpitz profoundly shaped British naval tactics. The physical might of the warship paled in comparison to its symbolic power. The mere thought of one of the world's most imposing warships, under the Third Reich's command, poised to unleash havoc in the Atlantic, was strong enough to redefine the war's strategic landscape. The relentless attempts to neutralize Tirpitz, be it through bombing sorties, stealthy mini-submarines, or other daring methods, underscore the depth of British concern. The ship's threat as an idea was, in many respects, even more fearsome than its enormous 15-inch guns. The fateful sinking of Tirpitz in November 1944 did more than merely eliminate a looming threat. For the Germans, it was a crushing psychological blow, starkly revealing that not even their crowning naval jewel was beyond the reach of destruction. For the Allies, this monumental victory showcased their burgeoning aerial capabilities and the extraordinary measures they would undertake to neutralize pivotal threats. The demise of Tirpitz lightened the burden on Allied fleets, allowing a sharper focus on the war's main front. Also, it bolstered British supremacy in the North Atlantic, ensuring the safe passage of Arctic convoys to the USSR and reconnecting both fronts of the war in Europe. More broadly, Tirpitz's sinking symbolized the waning might of Nazi Germany, sending an unequivocal message. The war's momentum had shifted towards the Allies, Beyond the sinking of the steel superstructure, the idea Tirpitz represented vanished beneath the waves, heralding the end not only of Nazi Germany, but also of the illustrious era of battleships. Deeply immersed in the scorching aerial dogfights of the Pacific Theatre, Lieutenant Kenneth Walsh and his squadron faced a daunting challenge as they were abruptly introduced to the Vought F4U Corsair. With an innovative inverted gull-wing design, this brand-new aircraft was capable of reaching speeds of 400 miles per hour and promised unparalleled aerial superiority. However, the pilots had little time to familiarize themselves with these advanced fighters or the strategic landscape before being thrust into combat. Their first mission was to escort B-24 bombers over Bougainville Island in the Solomons, forcing them to learn the intricacies of their Corsairs amidst the chaos of battle. This steep learning curve quickly revealed a deadly flaw in the aircraft, a lethal asymmetric stall. This peril, known as the Killer Corsair Syndrome, emerged during landing approaches. Without warning, the left wing could drop, plunging the aircraft into a lethal spin. Many pilots, including aces like Walsh, had to contend with both enemy fighters and their own aircraft trying to kill them. It was not a relationship that began well. Yet, despite these harrowing challenges, pilots and Vaught's engineers worked tirelessly to overcome the Corsair's shortcomings. The pilots fought to adapt to the aircraft's quirks, leveraging its strengths in combat, while engineers sought solutions to its design flaws. Over time, Walsh and his squadron grew to respect and trust their Corsairs, understanding the balance between its potential risks and remarkable capabilities. This bond was tested on August 30th, 1943, when Walsh, flying alone, faced off against 50 Japanese fighters. Japan would soon come to start calling this airplane the Whistling Death. As the world teetered on the brink of an unparalleled global conflict, the US Navy Bureau of Aeronautics in 1938 started the hunt for cutting-edge fighter aircraft to redefine air combat. Vought stepped up with a new design built around the powerhouse Pratt & Whitney R2000 800 double Wasp engine. They coupled this beast of an engine with a gargantuan 13-foot 4-inch propeller, outclassing its rivals and prepping for a surge in aerial velocity. This massive propeller, however, came with a catch, maintaining enough ground clearance without weakening the plane's frame. Vaught's flash of brilliance, the distinctive inverted gull wings, was the answer. These unique wings dipped near the plane's body, making room for the large propeller, then arched up at the tips, ensuring sturdy and compact landing gear. The design wasn't just a practical fix, it revolutionized the look and performance of fighter aircraft. The Corsair's gull wings allowed it to exploit the Pratt & Whitney engine's sheer speed, marking a pivotal shift in fighter design. The US Navy quickly caught wind of Vaught's innovations, awarding a prototype contract by June 1938. The design's potential led to outsourcing production contracts to Goodyear and Brewster for the Corsair FG and F3A models, highlighting its adaptability. When the first prototype soared on May 29, 1940, it was more than a test flight. It was a testament to the Corsair's capabilities. By October, the XF4U prototype blew past the 400 miles per hour mark, hitting an average of 405 miles per hour between Stratford and Hartford, Connecticut. This breakthrough not only ushered in a new chapter in American aerial might, but also signaled the Corsair's crucial role in World War II, despite the challenges ahead. As World War II engulfed Europe, the US Navy found itself in a tight spot, needing an even more rapid overhaul of its firepower in the air. Vought responded by supercharging their new prototypes with 6.50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings. This armament boost came at a cost, the removal of the wing fuel tanks, necessitating a larger fuselage tank and shifting the cockpit 36 inches back. These continuous modifications delayed the debut of this promising aircraft, setting 1942 as the year the Corsair would undergo its baptism by fire. Carrier landing trials. The Corsair's initial carrier landing tests in autumn 1942 were a debacle. Lieutenant Commander Sam Porter piloted the Navy's bent-wing Bird off the USS Sangamon in the Chesapeake Bay. After 4 perilous attempts, he aborted, feeling the aircraft nearly cost him his life. With its cockpit pushed back, Porter had trouble seeing the Sangamon's landing signal officer. The Corsair's extended hose nose drastically reduced his visibility, making it hard to follow crucial landing cues. Each landing saw the Corsair's shock-absorbing struts bottom out, bouncing like pogo sticks and skipping over the arrest wires. A disaster in waiting had other planes been on deck. But it wasn't just visibility issues or the deck bouncing that alarmed Porter. It was the Corsair's behavior at the crucial moment before landing. As it slowed for touchdown, the left wing would unexpectedly drop, causing a dangerous roll to port. Porter knew this posed a fatal risk, especially to inexperienced pilots. In a panic, they might slam the throttle to escape, but the massive torque from the R2800 engine and its giant propeller would only make things worse, potentially flipping the plane into a catastrophic crash. The Corsair's menacing asymmetric stall was soon quelled once the aerodynamic forces at play were fully deciphered. The root of the trouble lay in the fighter's massive propeller blades, which, as they cleaved through the air, generated a corkscrewing blast of prop wash. This turbulent airflow caused a mismatch in lift across the wings, with the left wing giving way first, and rapidly so. Overcoming this treacherous stall, however, proved to be a daunting challenge. Approaching the deck, the Corsair would adopt an aggressive nose-up posture, angling as steep as 17 degrees. At the sluggish speeds required for landing, and with the aircraft pitched in such an unconventional attitude, its control surfaces were virtually ineffective in the moments that mattered most. Engineers from Vought and Navy analysts, deep in the throes of the carrier trials, hit upon a solution. They needed to reduce the airflow over the good or starboard wing, aiming to make both wings forfeit lift in unison. The remedy involved the installation of a spoiler or stall strip to the leading edge of the starboard wing, positioned just beyond the reach of the gun ports. This unassuming gadget, a mere 6 inches in length and 3 inches wide, disrupted the aerodynamic integrity of the right wing enough to align its lift characteristics with those of the left. From that point forward, the Corsair's stall behavior became predictable, stalling symmetrically with grace. In the latter months of 1942 and into early 1943, sailors took to retrofitting Corsairs already in the field with makeshift stall strips carved from blocks of wood. Meanwhile, production lines at Vought, Goodyear and Brewster incorporated factory-fresh metal stall strips into each new bird rolling off the assembly line. The F4U Corsair, initially facing challenges for carrier operations, was primarily adopted by Marine Corps squadrons for use from island bases, leveraging its strengths without the complexities of carrier landings. However, through a series of upgrades and feedback from field use, significant improvements were made. Increasing the air pressure in the landing gear struts minimized touchdown bounce, and replacing the birdcage canopy with a bubble canopy enhanced pilot visibility. The breakthrough in carrier operations came from the British Royal Navy's Fleet Air Arm, which developed a curved landing approach technique that greatly facilitated carrier landings and was later adopted by the US Navy. Despite these improvements, landing the Corsair could still be problematic for inexperienced pilots. Ultimately, these enhancements allowed the Corsair to fulfill its potential in combat scenarios. In February 1943, the first squadron of Vought F4U Corsairs landed with VMF 124, ushering in a new era for the Marine Corps in air combat. Initially, their missions left room for improvement, but these formidable, gull-winged fighters soon became the mainstay of the Marine Corps shore-based air force, quickly outpacing the venerable Grumman F-4F Wildcat. Pilots faced the daunting task of mastering the Corsair's tricky landings. a fresh risk in the already dangerous Pacific theater skies. Yet these pilots didn't just adapt, they conquered, pushing the limits of the iconic bent-wing fighter. The squadron's entry into combat spotlighted Lieutenant Kenneth A. Walsh as the first Marine ace flying a Corsair. Despite limited hands-on time with these new birds, Walsh and his squadron mates dove into action, a raw mix of skill and determination against the odds. Time was a luxury they didn't have for thorough training. The battlefield's urgency called them to action for escort missions, tasks the Wildcats couldn't handle due to their restricted range and combat power. The Corsairs, along with P-38 Lightnings, were the only aircraft capable of providing the necessary long-range cover. As front-runners, VMF 124 pilots were pivotal in crafting the tactical playbook, setting the stage for subsequent squadrons to maximize these powerful fighters' potential. Walsh quickly recognized the strategic advantage of altitude, where the Corsair could dominate the Zero. He also learned the danger of low-speed dogfights against the Zero's superior maneuverability under 300 miles per hour. Bit by bit, the cornerstone strategies of Corsair combat were established, shaping the aircraft's legacy in aerial warfare. Walsh's trial by fire took place on April 1, 1943, over the expansive skies of the Russell Islands in the Northern Solomons. For 2 exhaustive hours, Walsh and his squadron of Marine F4Us patrolled their sector until they handed off the watch to the incoming P-38 Lightnings. No sooner had the sleek fighters taken over than they walked into an enemy trap. With the Lightnings under threat, Walsh didn't hesitate. He rallied his squadron, aborting their homeward-bound trajectory to plunge back into the maelstrom, standing shoulder to shoulder with the embattled P-38AS. In the ensuing tumult, a fierce dogfight unfolded. The Japanese, fixated on ambushing the Lightnings, were blindsided by the Corsair's sudden descent. Walsh, spotting his chance, lined up for a deflection shot against a Zero. His attempt whisked past, a near miss. Yet it was his wingman who delivered the killing blow, igniting the enemy aircraft in a blaze that marked their first victory. Undaunted, they approached a second Zero. This time, Walsh's aim was true. His bullets found their mark, tearing through the enemy with unforgiving precision, sending it spiraling down in a fiery trail of destruction. With deadly new experience in hand, Walsh was soon to etch his name into the annals of aerial combat on the morning of August 30th. In a sky swarming with hostility, he would single-handedly engage with a vast force of 50 Japanese aircraft. The day started out routinely, with a mission to escort bombers destined to strike at the heart of enemy bases on Bougainville. Yet Walsh's Corsair soon betrayed him with engine troubles. He was forced to separate from his wing and make an emergency landing at the advanced base in Munda, where he swiftly commandeered another Corsair, determined to rejoin the fray and complete his mission. Alone yet undaunted, Walsh pushed his aircraft to its limits, hoping to reunite with his squadron. Fate, however, had other plans, drawing him into a pivotal confrontation. Surrounded by a vast formation of over 50 Zeros, intent on decimating B-24 bombers, Walsh found himself the lone American fighter in a sprawling, scorching aerial battle. Yet in this dire moment, he held a singular advantage. They didn't know he was there. With deadly precision, he dispatched 2 of the enemy fighters, carving a path through the chaos. On his journey back, a distress call from other B-24s ensnared in combat redirected his course. Rising to the call, Walsh once again proved his mettle by downing another 2 Zeros in a series of devastating bursts of fire and high speed. However, victory did not come without cost. In the heat of battle, one of the Japanese fighters managed to land a crippling blow to Walsh's Corsair. Demonstrating remarkable calm and resolve under pressure, he ditched his failing aircraft into the water. This moment of sheer survival instinct marked his 3rd perilous water landing within a mere 6 months. For his extraordinary valor and skill during this monumental engagement, Walsh was bestowed with the Medal of Honor. Walsh's prowess in the skies not only cemented his status as a legendary ace, but also contributed significantly to the development of the Corsair combat doctrine. Through his actions, he dispelled the early misgivings about the Corsair being a potential death trap. Instead, he showcased the aircraft as an implacable force to be reckoned with, a testament to its remarkable capabilities. Now proven and familiar, pilots who used to dread the Corsair turned the machine into a true killer, tearing through the skies, its blistering speed and heavy-duty firepower giving them the upper hand over Japan's Zero fighter. The F4U quickly earned its stripes, knocking enemy planes out of the sky left and right. When the Corsair zoomed past at breakneck speeds, its wing-mounted intake sang a unique tune. The Americans swore the Japanese called it whistling death, though some records throw a wrench in that claim, suggesting the Japanese actually called it the Sikorsky. Initially, it was the Marines' ride of choice until the Navy joined the fray in 1943. By 1944, this bird was greenlit for carrier ops, teaming up with the Hellcat to shield US ships from kamikaze fireballs. But the Corsair wasn't just a one-trick pony. It doubled down as a fighter bomber, delivering crucial support to allies digging in their heels across the Pacific theater. The Central Pacific and the Philippines also saw this workhorse doubling as a fighter bomber. By 1944, Marine pilots started leveraging the F4U's punch in close support roles during beachhead assaults. By 1945, the Corsair had morphed into a bona fide mud fighter, taking the fight to the ground with an arsenal that included high explosive bombs, napalm and rockets, muddying up the battlefield. This aircraft played a pivotal role in the gritty battles for Palau, Iwo Jima and Okinawa, becoming key in the continued success of Allied efforts in the Pacific. As the Corsair, now dubbed Whistling Death, became increasingly critical in American operations, a pair of Marine pilots executed a heart-racing maneuver, narrowly surviving a head-on clash with a Japanese fighter in the thick of kamikaze threats. These missions by Japanese pilots, turning their aircraft into deadly projectiles against Allied forces, led to a ramp-up in defenses, including dense fighter patrols and a robust network of radar pickets and anti-aircraft artillery. On the morning of May 10, 1945, Captain Kenneth Rosa and First Lieutenant Robert Klingman soared into the sky in their Vought F4U Corsairs for a combat air patrol mission. Stationed 10 miles from Okinawa's Kadena airfield, with 2 wingmen at their sides, they were poised for action. Rosa, with his sharp vision, spotted vapor trails high above their formation and signaled to ascend. With their wingmen inexperienced in such high-stakes engagements, Rosa and Klingman advanced alone. Climbing beyond 38,000 feet, they set their sights on a Kawasaki Ki-45. The enemy aircraft attempted a northern escape, pushing its throttle to the limits. However, the relentless Marines, in a daring display of strategy, burned through half their ammunition to lighten their load and boost their speed. This bold tactic allowed Rosa to bridge the distance between them, hammering the Ki-45 with all he had left. After a fierce exchange, the Japanese fighter bore the brunt of their assault, its right wing battered and its right engine engulfed in flames, a testament to the Corsair's might and the pilot's unwavering resolve. With his guns jammed solid in the cold, thin air, Lieutenant Klingman faced a daunting challenge. But surrendering to fate wasn't in the cards for this determined Marine. He hatched a bold plan to take down the Ki-45 with nothing but the spinning blades of his Corsair's propeller. The Whistling Death had the most enormous propellers in the war, and they were about to be put on the offensive. While Rosa played the decoy, darting alongside the enemy to draw their fire, Klingman barreled in from behind. As the Japanese gunners turned their attention to him, he made his move, clipping the Ki-45's rudder with a precise strike from his propeller. But a single hit wasn't enough to seal the deal. Klingman, fueled by sheer will and not a hint of hesitation, dove back into the fray for 2 more passes. With each daring maneuver, he carved through the enemy aircraft's tail, finally cleaving off the rudder and right stabilizer. Robbed of control, the Ki-45 spiraled into a death dive, plunging into the South Pacific, a stone's throw from Okinawa's shores. Despite his Corsair's battered wings and bullet-riddled engines, Clingman pulled off a miraculous landing, gliding to safety with the engine dead. The wounded bird was not only salvaged, but returned to the skies to fight another day. For their bravery, both Rooser and Clingman were honored with the Navy Cross. Clingman's Corsair, dubbed the Angel of Okinawa, soared into legend, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who flew her. The tale of the Corsair's wartime achievements is nothing short of spectacular. By World War II's end, Corsairs had claimed 2,140 Japanese planes, incurring just 189 losses, a staggering 11-to-1 kill ratio that highlights the Corsair's aerial dominance. These warbirds executed 64,051 sorties, with a mere 15% from carriers, illustrating their broad deployment across Allied forces. Their ground assault was formidable, dropping over 15,500 tons of explosives, constituting roughly 70% of the bombs deployed by US fighters during the conflict. This highlights the Corsair's crucial role in both ground support and strategic bombing missions. Dubbed Whistling Death, the Corsair was both feared for its lethality and revered for its efficiency. Outpacing the F-6F Hellcat and narrowly trailing the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt in speed by just 13 miles per hour, its superior performance was clear. The Corsair's edge was honed by its supercharged engine, peaking in speed at 20,000 feet, a full 10,000 feet lower than the Thunderbolt's optimal altitude. Despite sharing the Pratt & Whitney R2 1800 double Wasp engine with its peers, the Corsair's design and tactical use solidified its iconic status. Emerging as a veritable legend, the Vought F4U Corsair transcended its World War II origins, the sole fighter from the era to continue production post-war. Serving the Navy and Marine Corps into the 1960s, it carved an indelible niche in aviation history. On the wintry night of January 30th, 1945, prison guards and personnel rushed outside the Cabanatuan POW camp in the Philippines, their eyes fixed on an Allied aircraft that seemed to have leapt straight from the pages of a science fiction novel. The P-61 Black Widow presented a sleek and foreboding shape, usually shrouded in the cloak of night. Her twin tails soared skyward like the outstretched wings of a predatory hawk. But on this night, the unique fighter was utterly exposed and fighting to stay in the air. The Night Hunter circled erratically, descending uncontrollably as her engines sputtered and backfired with a thundering howl. Witnessing one of America's most classified and imposing warplanes in a death spiral was a spectacle the Japanese guards couldn't resist. The Black Widow executed a wing waggle, barely skimmed over the tree-laden ridgeline, clearing it by 30 feet before vanishing over the horizon. The Japanese, spellbound, awaited the explosion. But this disaster of American aviation was not real. It was a brilliantly executed ruse to divert the guards' attention. It bought precious time for the combined might of the United States Army Rangers, Alamo Scouts, and Filipino guerrillas to stealthily traverse the open ground surrounding the camp and launch a bold rescue of the 500 Allied POWs languishing inside. As the Japanese guards awaited the mythical P-61 to explode over the horizon, they were blissfully unaware of the shocking turn of events that awaited them. In the dead of night, as Luftwaffe bombers relentlessly hammered London during World War II, during the harrowing Blitz, an urgent call echoed across the Atlantic. The Allies needed a warplane to own the night skies and defend their homes against the German raids, and this was the birth cry of the P-61 Black Widow, a fighter conceived in desperation and born of necessity. The British Purchasing Commission, casting a critical eye over US aircraft, demanded a night fighter with the stamina for an 8-hour vigil in the sky. equipped with early heavy airborne interception radar units and bristling with a lethal array of multiple gun turrets. Jack Northrop, a visionary in the aviation world, knew these demands called for an unprecedented machine, a large multi-engine aircraft. He rolled up his sleeves and dove into the design, driven by the British's dire needs. In November 1940, the P-61 Black Widow project began. It was designed as a sleek aircraft with a mysterious look to it. One could clearly picture it lurking in the night, claiming its victims before they knew they were being hit. It was also a rather large aircraft for a fighter jet, 50 feet long and with a wingspan of 66 feet. Simultaneously, the US Army Air Corps echoed the British plea. General Emmons, carrying the weight of the British night fighter requirements, brought them stateside. The Emmons Board, in a no-nonsense approach, laid out the ground rules, underlining the massive challenges posed by the hulking heavy airborne interception radar and the marathon loiter times. They put their chips on a twin-engine design, eyeing powerhouses like the Pratt and Whitney Double Wasp and the Duplex Cyclone. Northrop's initial blueprint was a lengthy fuselage gondola straddling twin-engine nacelles and tail booms, powered by the roaring Pratt and Whitney R2 1810 Double Wasp radial engines. This night interceptor was to be manned by a 3-airman crew. The Black Widow's lethal bite could rival any enemy. I carried 4.20 mm Hispano M2 cannons in the lower fuselage and 4.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns in the dorsal turret. Another stealthy innovation was a new glossy black paint instead of the usual olive green and grey paint in the metal armor. Night flight tests in Florida in October 1943 pitted both schemes against each other. The black model was undetected in 80% of flights through searchlight beams. Crafting the P-61 was a Herculean task. Wrestling with her massive frame and hefty weight for a fighter, melding together the radar and armament systems was like taming a wild beast. This increased the development times again and again, even as the British continued to fight against the German night raids. It took Northrop engineers over a year and a half to fix developmental delays and revisions, all while the Army Air Forces were desperate to start training night pilots. They had no problem getting the crews of volunteers for the training. Redesign demands during the pre-production phase took Northrop 2 critical wartime years. Despite the massive delays, the Black Widow's modification phases turned it into a platform for innovation. Her imposing size and twin-tail boom design were a bold leap, unprecedented in the world of fighter aircraft. The P-61 Black Widow became America's first purpose-built night predator. Despite her daunting size, the P-61 was surprisingly nimble in a dogfight, a revelation that bolstered the confidence of her pilots. The P-61's official public debut was quite dramatic. In January 1944, a P-61 performed a flyover of the Los Angeles Coliseum filled with 75,000 spectators as part of an Army-Navy show. The aircraft's incredible aesthetics and design were mesmerizing and unlike anything seen by the public so far. One of the most striking features of the P-61 was its twin-boom design. This rare configuration, where the fuselage ends in 2 separate tail booms, was a visual departure from the conventional single fuselage aircraft. Each boom supported a vertical stabilizer and rudder, framing the horizontal stabilizer and central nacelle containing the cockpit and weaponry. Spectators could hardly believe how massive the aircraft was for a fighter aircraft, with a length of 45.5 feet and a wingspan of 66 feet. The aircraft's full load weight was a substantial 22,600 pounds, further emphasizing its daunting stature. As it entered service in the final months of World War II, the Black Widow's combination of size, power, advanced technology, and distinctive design made it an awe-inspiring sight in the skies. The first squadron to fly the Black Widow in Europe was the 422nd Night Fighter Squadron on May 23, 1944. Almost a month later, the 425th Squadron received their Widows. However, both of them received the jet too late to participate in the D-Day invasion on June 6th. The Black Widow's first real mission was against the feared German V-1 Buzz bomb. In the Mediterranean, the 414th Squadron received its P-61 in December. They worked together with the 422nd Squadron in the Battle of the Bulge, the last major attack campaign against the Allies on the Western Front during World War II. During this battle, the P-61's obsolescence first became apparent. The delays and hurdles in the lengthy development phase finally came back to haunt them. Lieutenant van Nyswender was piloting his Daisy May Black Widow when an encounter with a Messerschmitt 419 led to a pursuit across the woods. Van Nyswender attempted to attack and follow its enemy by chasing it at full throttle, but by the time the Black Widow caught up, the Me 410 pulled away at 400 miles per hour, making the P-61 seem so sluggish it looked like time was standing still. The 422nd and 425th Squadrons were also critically short of spare parts by the end of 1944. Being a smaller company, Northrop couldn't keep up with the demand, and the issue was never corrected. The squadrons had to make do with whatever equipment they had on hand, even adapting their own makeshift parts in order to keep their revolutionary birds in the sky. The problems continued to mount in the field, airflow issues from her top turret and grappling with spare part shortages in European squadrons. She was a versatile war machine, adept in both night patrols and ground assaults, but she was no match for the modern German fighter that now roamed free across Europe. Most operational P-61S ended up being sent to the Pacific. After Guadalcanal was secured in late 1942, the American stronghold urgently needed nighttime protection from Japanese bases in the surrounding areas. But the Black Widows weren't ready yet, so the Americans adapted B-25S, P-40S, P-38S, and P-70S as night fighters. Finally, in May 1944, the Black Widows were ready to fight in the Pacific. The first to receive a P-61 was the 6th Squadron. They were the only night-fighting squadron until the 418th and 419th Squadrons also began working with Black Widows. Lieutenant Dale Haberman and his radio operator, Lieutenant Ray Mooney, manned an early model P-61A christened Moon Happy within the ranks of the 6th Night Fighter Squadron. On the fateful night of June 30th, 1944, shortly after the squadron's operational debut on Saipan, they locked horns with a Mitsubishi G-4M2 Betty bomber, flanked by a Japanese escort, likely a Mitsubishi A6M50. This encounter gained an edge of suspense as the intercom chatter between Haberman and Mooney was relayed back to base. Amidst a routine patrol, a jolt of adrenaline hit when base control reported an unidentified aircraft hurtling towards Lieutenant Haberman's P-61. Oblivious to the ambush lying in wait, the adversary's bomber was squarely in the Black Widow's sights. Haberman, lying in wait beneath the enemy's flight path, throttled up for a stomach-churning 180-degree turn, positioning behind the bomber now barreling towards Saipan's airfields. Drawing near the radar blip, Lieutenant Mooney cautioned Haberman to ease off the throttle as the singular target split into two, the bomber now accompanied by a Japanese fighter. Ascending to 17,000 feet, the enemy remained unaware of the night predator at their 6. When the distance shrunk to a mere 700 feet, Mooney cued Haberman to unleash hell. The P-61's 420 NLM cannons roared to life, unleashing a tempest of fire upon the ill-fated Betty. Engulfed in flames, it nosedived into the ocean. Mooney's sharp call echoed through the tense airwaves. Quote, "Look out, Hap, there's a Jap fighter on our tail." Deathly silence ensued, broken only by the enemy's errant shots. Alerted, Haberman tilted his port wing downward, diving towards the ocean in a desperate evasion, rudders working overtime to shake the pursuer. At a mere 1,200 feet above sea level, Haberman leveled Moon Happy, still at breakneck speed, and veered sharply, hoping to reacquire the enemy on radar. But the night swallowed the fighter whole. It was a tactical play. The Betty likely served as the fighter's vanguard, explaining its tight formation and singular radar signature. The 418th Squadron, based at Morotai, Halmahera's, Netherlands, East Indies, operated the top-scored Black Widow. The squadron had 18 successful attacks and was able to destroy 3 Kawasaki Ki-61S in just one night. At the controls of the aptly named Hard to Get was Captain Kenneth Schreiber, flanked by radar specialist First Lieutenant Bonnie Rux of the 547th Night Fighter Squadron. This pair was tasked with an unconventional mission to execute a low-altitude flyby over the prison camp, creating a diversion that would enable a coalition of United States Army Rangers, Alamo Scouts, and Filipino guerrillas to stealthily navigate the perilous terrain surrounding the camp. Following the capitulation of tens of thousands of US troops during the Battle of Bataan, many were incarcerated in the Cabanatuan prison camp after the harrowing Bataan Death March. The Japanese, anticipating an American offensive, transferred most prisoners, leaving just over 500 American and other Allied POWs and civilians in the worst conditions imaginable. They endured disease, torture and malnourishment, with the looming fear of execution before General Douglas MacArthur's return to Luzon with American forces. In late January 1945, a daring plan was hatched by 6th Army leaders and Filipino guerrillas to rescue the prisoners. A formidable force of over 100 Rangers and Scouts, alongside 200 guerrillas, embarked on a 30-mile incursion behind enemy lines to reach the camp. The unprecedented idea of deploying a warplane to distract the camp guards was initially met with skepticism, particularly by Ranger Commander Captain Robert Prince, who worried that the spectacle might alert the Japanese to impending Allied action. A crucial 45 minutes before the assault, Schreiber and Rux roared over the camp, brilliantly simulating a plane in dire straits, teetering on the brink of destruction. The Japanese, utterly deceived, watched intently as the P-61 performed a perilous dance of survival, engines sputtering and misfiring explosively, a result of Schreiber's expert manipulation of the ignition, intermittently cutting and reigniting power. The aircraft's wings waggled defiantly as they skimmed the tree-laden ridgeline, a mere 30 feet from catastrophe, only to soar upwards and dive for another heart-stopping pass. Eventually, they disappeared over the horizon, leaving the Japanese spellbound, their ears tuned for the anticipated clash of destruction. This daring aerial charade left the Japanese completely oblivious to the imminent raid on Cabanatuan. Against staggering odds, Schreiber, Rux and their versatile P-61 Black Widow accomplished the impossible. Even Captain Prince had to concede, admitting, quote, "The idea of an aerial decoy was a little unusual and honestly I didn't think it would work, not in a million years, but the pilot's maneuvers were so skillful and deceptive that the diversion was complete. I don't know where we would have been without it." As the P-61 Black Widow buzzed the camp, Lieutenant Carlos Tombo and his guerrillas, bolstered by a handful of Rangers, executed a crucial maneuver, severing the camp's telephone lines, effectively isolating it from the substantial Japanese force in Cabanatuan. In the initial 15 seconds of gunfire, the camp's guard towers and pillboxes were systematically decimated. Sergeant Ted Richardson bravely rushed to blast the padlock off the main gate with his .45 pistol. The Rangers at the gate swiftly brought the guard barracks and officer quarters under a hail of bullets, while their comrades at the rear neutralized the enemy near the prisoners' huts, setting the stage for the evacuation. A bazooka team from F Company charged up the main road towards a tin shack, identified by the scouts as housing enemy tanks. Despite attempts by Japanese soldiers to flee in 2 trucks, the team efficiently destroyed both the vehicles and the shack. Initially, the POWs mistook the gunfire as the onset of a Japanese massacre. Descriptions of the attack likened it to a chaotic symphony of, quote, "whistling slugs, Roman candles, and flaming meteors." Prisoners scrambled for cover in shacks, latrines, and irrigation ditches. Complications arose when the Rangers called out to the POWs for rescue. Many, paralyzed by fear and weakened by malnourishment, suspected a Japanese ruse and remained hidden. This unforeseen challenge necessitated that the rescuers forcefully extract many POWs from their hideouts amidst the fierce firefight. By 8:15 p.m., the camp was liberated from Japanese control. The Rangers, along with the debilitated POWs, were safely evacuated using carabao carts, thoughtfully organized by Pahota. The Scouts remained vigilant, monitoring for enemy movements. This mission, initially deemed an impossible rescue, turned into a monumental success, thanks largely to the exceptional capabilities of a single P-61 Black Widow and its valiant crew. What transpired with this particular Black Widow during the twilight hours of World War II defies belief. It notched the final 2 aerial victories of the conflict, one on the ultimate night of the war and another astonishingly 24 hours after the official cessation of hostilities, each achieved without discharging a single round. On the eve of August 14, 1945, Lady in the Dark was under the command of a different crew. In a tense, low-altitude pursuit, the American crew kept pushing an enemy warplane into increasingly desperate maneuvers as the night fighter closed the space between the two birds. In a lethal miscalculation, the Japanese pilots dove too close to the water as they fought to lose the American hunter. The Japanese warplanes plunged into the sea, erupting in flames, yet not a shot was fired by the Black Widow. Although the war drew to a close at midnight, the threat of nocturnal kamikaze strikes against American bases lingered, keeping the P-61S vigilantly on alert. The subsequent evening, Captain Kendall embarked on what seemed a routine sortie at 7:10 p.m. Within the hour, a potential adversary, a bogey, was reported approaching at 4,500 feet. The chase unfolded swiftly, with Kendall's radar observer detecting window, a deceptive tactic involving the release of foil strips to disrupt radar tracking. The adversary was executing sharp maneuvers, clearly aware of the pursuit. Kendall recounted the pursuit's intensity, quote, "Getting close enough for a positive identification proved to be difficult. He was taking violent, evasive action and dropping window, which were bundles of tinsel-like strips of aluminum foil designed to confuse our radar. This guy knew we were behind him, but I have no idea how he knew. My RO, Lieutenant Shearer, was talking me in closer to about 800 feet when all of a sudden, the left side pilot's window popped open and the rush of air drowned out the communications with him. Down this low at such a high speed and not being able to understand my observer was very unhealthy." He continued, quote, "I had to back off, secure the window, and then get back in touch with him. In the meantime, I lost contact with the bogey, but quickly picked him up again and was able to close on his tail again despite his defensive moves. I had one eye on my target and one eye on my altimeter. Suddenly, the window popped open again, and once again I closed it, and as I picked him up for a third time, the same thing happened again. Regardless, I went after him for a fourth time, and Control gave me permission to shoot him down, even though we didn't have a positive identification." As Kendall re-engaged, the bogey vanished from the radar, with no further window detected. Ground witnesses later reported the intruder's crash, its wreckage strewn across a broad area. The aircraft was identified as a Nakajima Kai 44 Tojo fighter, likely on a malevolent mission. Lady in the Dark had thwarted its potential objective, assuming it had one. This encounter, not recorded as an official kill due to the war's conclusion, stands as a testament to a Black Widow's final World War II victories, achieved without firing a single shot. By the war's end, 941 P-61S had rolled off the line, with their units claiming a tally of 109 enemy aircraft shot down. Post-war, she stepped back from the limelight and was replaced by newcomers like the F-82 Twin Mustang. Today, a handful of P-61S stand as silent sentinels in museums, testaments to a pivotal chapter in the saga of military aviation. Yet, with a limited fleet of operational Black Widows, insufficient parts for repairs, and a narrow window of just 6 months before the war's end, the legacy of this unique and powerful warplane has been largely overshadowed by more iconic and consequential fighters of the era. Despite these challenges, the P-61's contributions were significant, particularly in the Pacific. Its engagement in night combat and interception missions underscored its potential in a specialized role. However, the broader narrative of World War II aviation has tended to favor aircraft that had a more sustained and widespread impact throughout the war. Northrop's engineers made concerted efforts to rectify the P-61's shortcomings. They revamped the airborne intercept radar, enhancing the performance of its remote-controlled turret. Despite adding turbochargers aimed at boosting speed, the Black Widow still lagged in velocity compared to its contemporaries. In the European theater, the British Mosquito Mke-7 emerged as a more viable combatant, gradually sidelining the Black Widow to reserve status, where its role shifted primarily to a training aircraft. Still, the Black Widow left its mark in every theater of World War II, tallying an impressive combat record with the destruction of 127 enemy aircraft and 18 German V-1 buzz bombs. Post-war, the Black Widow was enlisted in Operation Thunderstorm, a joint venture led by 4 US government agencies: the Army Air Force, the Navy, the Weather Bureau, and the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, the precursor to NASA. This project focused on thunderstorm research to safeguard military and civilian aircraft against such hazardous conditions. Many breakthroughs and theories from this study became foundational in our current understanding of thunderstorms and associated meteorological phenomena. The Black Widow was officially retired from service in 1954. Despite its late entry into World War II, the P-61 fought valiantly until its conclusion. The aircraft also demonstrated the invaluable role of airborne intercept radar. This technology would become a standard feature in US warplanes, underscoring the Black Widow's enduring legacy in aerial warfare and military aviation.